So I just kind of, after that, I just kept doing those things that really scared me and really made me nervous and really made me feel uncertain. And I kind of allowed myself to be vulnerable before, where I hadn't before, right? I just held everything in and didn't want to be that person.
Hey, so it's Carla Rand back here on the Carla Rand Show, and I have Danielle Boos with me. Danielle, welcome to the program.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to have you here. So we saw each other at the gym, which just seems to be where we always meet, because it used to be at the other gym, now it's at this gym. And right away I was like, I want to chat with you. We got talking, and then talking about like what you're doing now, because you've done some like MMA fighting. You're a social worker now. You were a probation officer before. You've kind of got lots of stuff going on. You're a gymnastics coach, right? Lots of things going on. So I just wanted to see where you were at. And we got talking, and I thought, you know what, Danielle, you have a pretty incredible story, and I haven't really heard it yet. So I was hoping to hear it, and I think our listeners would like to hear it. Let's go back a little bit.
Sure.
Where did you grow up? Tell us a little bit about your family, and then kind of how did you get to that little girl, Danielle, to kind of where you are right now?
So I grew up in Edson. I was born in Whitecourt, and my family moved here when I was 1. So I always just lived here. I have a sister who's older than me, a year older. She lives here as well, and she's got 2 kids now. So we just lived in Edson. My mom and dad divorced when I was about 12, and then they both got remarried. So when they got remarried, I got a whole bunch more siblings. So my stepmom had 4 kids of her own. My stepdad had 3 kids. So I had this huge family all the time growing up. Yeah. The dynamics in our homes were a little bit different. My mom's home was a little bit more, I don't want to say relaxed in certain ways, but very strict in others. And my dad was very opposite. So it was interesting growing up. I do remember like my dad, my dad and stepmom, they were foster parents. Mm-hmm. And so they always had kids all the time. So it was like, we go over to my dad's and it was like, we got 3 new kids. Right. Mm-hmm. And so getting to hang out with them was neat. And I think that was a really pivotal moment looking back on it, because I grew up with these kids that struggled. They didn't have moms and dads. They didn't have stability. They came from very broken homes, and I grew up with them and I was friends with them, and I still talk to some of them today. And I think it's been like that kind of changed my perspective on a lot of things at a young age. So I was always this kid that was a little bit different. I didn't really fit into one social group. I played sports, but I also played guitar, and I hung out with the kids that didn't have friends, and I hung out with the really smart kids, and I just kind of floated through high school. When I was 15, I had my first actual boyfriend, and it was good for a while. And then he ended up getting kicked out of his home, and he moved into my mom's place. And at the time I thought, this is whatever. It's cool. I get to live with my boyfriend. That's neat. But it was only a couple of weeks after, and he got really abusive. He got really mean. And he started leaving bruises on me. And I was going to high school and trying to kind of figure all of this out. And I didn't talk to anybody for a long time because I was so afraid.
You were only 15.
Yeah, I was very young. And he lived with us for a year and a half. So until I was 16 and a half. And it was really hard because in high school, 1, it's not something that people talk about. 2, we had the same friend group, right? So I never wanted to talk bad about him. 1, out of fear. 2, out of I was like, well, he's going to lose all his friends. So I just kept quiet. And actually my gym teacher then was the only adult that actually paid attention enough to notice. And so the one day I remember him being like, hey, can I talk to you? And I was like, oh crap. I messed up something, right? I'm in trouble. And he was like, I noticed you have bruises, and I noticed these things. And so I remember this conversation being, I guess, very supportive in a different way, right? And it didn't come from the person I expected it to. And at this point, I was really struggling with mental health and just coping because I didn't know how to deal with that. I was young and no one.
Your parents didn't notice it?
They did. Well, it's a difficult conversation because I I had expressed at one point like that this was happening. And the response that I got from my family was, well, we can't do anything about it because he lived here and he can't be homeless. So what do you want us to do? And I was kind of like, in that moment, I was like, well, I'm your daughter, right? Like I need to feel safe. And I didn't feel safe. And it just increased that kind of that mental health struggle for me, because home is your safe place.
Yeah.
Home is where you go when you feel afraid, you go home. And I couldn't really go anywhere at this point. So I was just this anxious kid throughout like a couple years of high school. Like I was just this anxious kid who didn't really I stopped doing things. I stopped, hanging out with my friends. I stopped playing sports. I took a break from everything because I just couldn't cope. And looking back at when this teacher noticed and stepped up, I was really taken aback and really surprised, because I was like, well, he doesn't know me. He doesn't know me anything. But he was really great because my boyfriend at the time was in my same gym class, my same fitness class. And he used to bully me all the time, in class. And every time he would say something to me, he would send him to the office. He's like, nope, you're out of here. Nope, you're done. No more. And he just had this, there was no, he wasn't allowing it. He wasn't going to see it. And that kind of, for me, in this dark place was kind of a light, because I knew that there was portions of the day where I could feel safe. And so from that, I kind of just really hung on to that piece. Eventually, this boyfriend did move out on his own, not because anyone made him. He moved out on his own because he wanted to go live with his other friend. And so he ended up moving out. And so I was really behind at this point in high school because I didn't really care. And I was just really trying to cope and deal with my own stuff. And so when he moved out, I ended up started taking all these courses by correspondence. And I kind of thought to myself that, I don't know if they still do it, but when I was in high school, they did this incentive program where if you got 140 credits when you graduated, because 100 is mandatory and 140 would be over, that the school would pay you $1,000. And so I remember being like, I'm going to do that. It's super far-fetched, but I'm going to do that. And I remember taking home all of these piles of correspondence booklets, on psychology, on forensics, on law. I took every single legal course you could take. I took every single psychology course you could take. And I ended up graduating with 140 credits.
Did you get $1,000?
I did get $1,000.
Yeah,
I did. And so I was kind of like, that's really cool, because I was really, really behind. And so it was an interesting childhood, and my teenage years weren't ideal. And I held a lot of resentment for a long time about a lot of these things that happened when I was younger. And it was funny, actually, I had a counselor at one point, and I was very much in this blaming space where I was like, it's their fault that I have anxiety. It's their fault that I'm struggle with this. And I remember my therapist looked at me and she goes, but what can you take responsibility for? And at the time I was mad. I was like, what did you just say to me? What?
My God.
Yeah. And she said, what a lot of people struggle with is we expect these apologies from people, and we refuse to let go of these hurtful things because we expect an apology, because that's what we would do. If we hurt someone, that's normal, right? You hurt someone, you're mean to someone, you say something you don't mean, you apologize. And they said the problem with these people is not everyone's going to apologize. Not everyone's going to take ownership of the hurt they put onto other people. And she said, so what can you take responsibility for now? She's like, I'm not telling you to take responsibility for the abuse, for the trauma, for your anxiety. But she's like, what is one thing that you can take responsibility for? And I thought about it, and I couldn't think of anything at first because I was so mad that she said this to me. And I remember going home after that and I was like, well, I'm taking responsibility for myself because I'm healing. I'm seeing a counselor. And so when I seen her the next time, I was like, I realized that I can take responsibility for how I cope and for what I do with what happened to me. And so she was like, yeah, she said, people who can take responsibility for even 1% of the shitty things that happen in their life make huge changes. Because she said they aren't relying on the other people to change.
Right.
They're changing themselves, their perspective, their mindset, their focus, you know, all of those things. And today still, like in social work, when I work with clients, I tell them that. And a lot of them get really mad at me initially as well, because they're like, I shouldn't take responsibility for this. But then when I explain it, it makes sense. And so I really try now to live my life by that principle, right? Okay, I don't like what this person's doing. I don't like how that person's talking to me. How can I change how I respond to that? Do I need to have a reaction? No. Do I also need to have them in my life? Also no.
Yeah.
Right? Instead of putting this pressure on people to change, just accepting like what is good for me in my life, what is not good for me in my life, and what am I willing to accept and what am I not?
Yeah.
And so I still, like, to this day, I use that all the time at work, like all the time. Because it changed my perspective in such a huge, huge way.
I think taking responsibility for things in your life is, that's so key.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's where, when we realize that we're actually in control of where we're going, right? It's a powerful mindset to have. Because even in my work or with my friends or with people in the community, it's, well, this person is my barrier. This is my barrier. This is the problem. And it's like, no, they're not. These are excuses for why you're not doing.
You're allowing them to be the barrier. You're allowing them to hold you back.
Exactly. You're you have this mindset that's holding you back. You're making choices that are holding you back and aren't allowing you to propel forward. And so I think that mindset piece is so huge. And I didn't really realize it until that point. And so now I try to be really conscious on what is my mindset. So if I'm having a bad day, it's like, okay, well, why am I having a bad day? Right? Is it worth being mad all day because a guy on the highway cut me off? Right? Like,
it might be.
It might be. In the moment, I'm like, oh, but it's, I shouldn't let it ruin my whole day. And if I let it ruin my whole day, that's not his fault. That's my fault. Right? And when you spin it like that and you take responsibility, it changes. And often people are less angry and they calm down a lot quicker when they realize that we're the ones that often are holding ourselves back or our biggest barrier, right? For me, my anxiety, I let my anxiety run my life for a long time. And I was afraid to do a lot of things and to try things. And I hit a point where I realized I had missed out on a lot of things because I was afraid. It was awful. I remember looking at like my friends having these awesome experiences and going places and traveling. And I was like, I was too afraid to go anywhere. I was too afraid to do anything. I was too afraid to like step outside of that box because I was afraid because it was something new. And that's a coping, like it's trauma response, right? You stick with what you know. And so that's actually why I started fighting, because I lived in this small box and I was trying to cope. So I was diagnosed with PTSD in 2015, and I started really training hard at this point because I was determined that this was not going to be like, I can't live like this forever. Like I can't do this all the time. And so I started training jiu-jitsu, and I remember going to class and I was the only girl. That was it. Everyone else was men. And so I was literally walking to a room of my worst nightmare ever. And I remember sparring and they're teaching me how to defend myself and they're teaching me these things. And one of the first classes, I remember I instinctively, I punched someone because I panicked. Like I just wasn't felt like I was backed into a corner and I punched him and I was like, oh my God. And he's like, it's fine. Like, it's okay. He's like, I get it. Right. And I remember just pushing through that. And it was really hard because I used to leave crying because I'd be so, I guess, in fight or flight the whole time. Right. So you're there for 2 hours. And so that whole time I'm feel like I'm literally battling life or death. Right. Because of the way my brain was structured at that time. And so I'd leave and I would just cry, just cry.
But you knew somehow that was therapeutic for you. So you stuck it out.
Exactly.
Okay.
So I started eventually, every time I'd go, I'd cry less. Right. And the first time, I remember I used to get in, I'd be sweating and wouldn't even be exercising at this point, right? I'm just like sweating and I'm gross and I'm like, ah. But then it started getting easier and it started becoming just normal. And I kind of hype myself up for it. I'd be like, no, I'm going to go. I know I'm going to be nervous when I get there, but I'm just going to go anyway. And I kept going and I kept going. And some of these people that I trained with are still like some of my best friends, like to this day, even though I don't train as often anymore. And so I made these lifelong friends and these lifelong connections, and they supported me at a time when I didn't even really fully know what I needed, and they were still there. And so the really neat thing is then when I took my first, so this whole thing is, when I look back on it, I'm like, I'm surprised I didn't die, because I got this offer to fight in Vegas. And I'd never met the producer or the agency, the fighting group. I never met them. Got this offer to fight, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to do that. And so I remember like telling my mom, I was like, oh, I'm going to go take this fight in Vegas. And she's like, you're going to be like human trafficked. Like, you have no idea where you're going right now. And I was like, well, yeah, you're probably right. And so I hemmed and hawed. And then 2 days before, I was like, no, I'm going. And I like just packed my stuff, and had never flown by myself, like never traveled by myself anywhere in my life. And I got on this plane to Vegas and we got to the airport, and I'm like waiting in the airport. And there's a sign, it has my name on it. And I'm like, okay, this is cool. Like, now I'm getting nervous because, you know, I don't really know any of these people. And so I really just kind of dived into this experience because I felt like I had missed out on so much. And I was like, I could go to Vegas for a week and a half, like no cost to me. I get to train at some elite gyms with really elite trainers. And I just get to go experience. And I was like, I don't even care if I lose the fight at this point.
Right.
Because I just wanted to experience things and not like almost prove to myself that my fear wasn't holding me back, because I knew that it had. And so I ended up going and fighting, and it was a great experience. I loved it so much. And the people were so supportive. The training was excellent. We got to explore Vegas a little bit. We got to go to the head of the agency's house, and he had like a pool, and like it was really, really neat. So I left and I was like, this is amazing. I left with like $2,000 American for fighting and winning. And I was like, this is cool. Like, I just got paid to go on a holiday. Yeah. And I got to fight people. It's like, who wouldn't do this all the time? And so I ended up fighting for this company. I went to California. I went to Vegas again. I went to North Dakota, Kansas City, like all over the states, fighting because I just wanted to do things that scared me.
Did you get hurt?
Never serious. I did have like my face would get bruised, and I had a lot of like body bruising. It's an interesting thing with like the league that I fought in, a lot of the girls were more focused on, and it's a good tactic actually, because if you wear out a person's body, right, they start covering and they drop their hands, right? And so then it opens it up for like a knockout, right? Or for a head kick, whatever you're choosing to go for. And it tires your body out. When someone's continually punching your body, it's tiring. Because you have to flex and defend yourself. And so it's a good tactic, really, when you look at it from a statistical standpoint. But so my body used to be almost worse than my face often, right? Yeah. And so I remember coming home and like I never was super beat up. I never had like big black eyes or anything awful. And but the experience was amazing. And I think that environment too, it was amazing because you have all these other fighters on the card and we all supported each other. So you're in the back and you're warming up and the other fighters are like, you're going to do great. You're going to do awesome. Like, this is going to be great. You're going to win. And they're all hyping you up. Right. And I'd never experienced that level of support before in my life, where you just have like this group that's surrounding you and they're like, you're going to do awesome. This is going to be great. And don't worry about it. And it was just incredible. And it almost became like addicting. Like,
I was going to say, it's a dopamine.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And so for someone like myself who never really had that huge support team cheering you on 24/7, it was a huge like dopamine rush where I was like, this is incredible. And so I took a lot out of that period of my life because one, I did something that I never thought I would do. It was horrifying in a lot of ways. And I really just was like, I'm nervous, I'm scared, but I'm going to do this anyway because I want to try it. And so I just kind of, after that, I just kept doing those things that really scared me and really made me nervous and really made me feel uncertain. And I kind of allowed myself to be vulnerable before where I hadn't before, right? I just held everything in and didn't want to be that person. So
it's like the door gets opened a crack and then you're like, let's just blow this door right open. Let's embrace everything that we're freaked out of because I've been sitting in my room or whatever for, so much of my life and I just want to live. I can actually relate to that feeling, in different parts of my life, that kind of like, let's just go for it. Yeah.
It's incredible when you do. Because you really unlock like what you're capable of. Mm-hmm. And I was like, because I was such an anxious kid, I always doubted myself. I always was like, oh, I'm not good enough to do that. Not good enough to do this. And I let myself defeat myself. And once I realized that, I was like, this has to stop. Like, why am I doing this to myself? And so it was really powerful. And now I try and encourage other people to do that. Right. I encourage other people, like, do something that scares you. Do something that you're afraid of, because the payoff can be really, really good. But if I would have let my fear hold me back, I wouldn't be here. Right. I wouldn't have all these other blessings. And it just shows up all the time, right? Where it's all of these blessings and come from stepping out of what you're comfortable with. When you stay in your comfort zone, you lose hundreds and thousands of opportunities because you're too afraid to try. And I've learned too, like there's certain things that I'm just not great at, right? Like I'm going to do this and I'm going to fail. And I just know that's not for me. Right. But oftentimes when you try something, you learn something from the experience, whether it's something that you continue doing or it's something that you don't, you learn from it. And so you're still taking something out of it. It still is providing you information and a life path and experience. And so that's where, at the beginning of this, you said I've done so many different things, and like I've tried everything now because I didn't. And so I coached gymnastics, I've coached basketball, I ran an ultra marathon. I didn't train for it because why would I do that? Right. Just signed up for it because I was like, why? I can run 60 some kilometers in 6 hours. Why not? And so I did that, and I was really sore and regretted not training after, but I still did it. And it was a mindset thing, right? And I tell people all the time, like, truly, like, your mindset is your biggest barrier. And I'm sure you know that too, right? Like, if you were tired one day or you didn't feel well and you're like, well, I'm not going to the gym because I'm tired or I had a bad day, right? You wouldn't have the business or be where you are either. Right. And it's finding ways to get through your day or to do the things that you know that you should do or need to do, even when you don't feel like doing it.
Yes.
So
it's like, it's a discipline, but it's like, it's more than just discipline. Like, it's more than just gritting your teeth. It's like picturing something.
Yes.
Right. Whether it's like where you want to be, or it's like, I don't know, some weird, like there's weird things that, you do in your head to kind of get through. Like maybe it's like when I'm doing my last set, I'm like growling, or you know what I mean? Like when we're playing certain music or seeing, I don't know. It's just a thing. I think everybody has to kind of find out what that is. And so for you, like maybe when you were going to go to Vegas or you're going to, do this thing, like there's this little voice in your head that says, no, don't do that. It's going to be scary. And then it's like pushing through. And so like, is there something that you do, like a shift in your head or something that helps you to carry out, like to just do it, even though there's still that voice saying, don't do it, you're going to fail or whatever? Honestly,
for me, the biggest thing is I do this with my kids every day. I actually have a big chart on my wall and it's called our thankful things. And I wrote on it, today I'm thankful for. Mm-hmm. And so every time I go into something and I'm like, I can't do this. I'm too afraid. I'm not going to be successful. I start like, okay, what do you have today that you're grateful for? And so I'm like, okay, like, my husband, my kids, my education, my job. And then I start realizing that all of these things came from doing things that I didn't think I was going to achieve. And that is my constant reminder. And so it's really neat because my my kids too, they were used to always be like, well, we can't do that. Well, we can't do this. Well, we never get to do anything, right? You know how kids like, 7:30 on a school night, they want to go to the pool and you're like, you got to go to bed in an hour. And they're like, oh, my life is awful, right? And so I started getting them to do this thankful thing. So every night before bed, they have to think of one thing that they're thankful for. And at first they were kind of like, yeah, okay, whatever. And it's amazing now because I put this up about a month and a half ago. And every night, even if I don't remind them, they're like, we forgot to do our thankful thing. We have to do this before we go to bed. And they are on it. Or they'll come home from school and they're like, I already know what my thankful thing is for today. And just trying to teach them at a young age too, to shift their mindset. Because like, I didn't have that, right? Growing up. That's one thing that I think more people should do is have conversations about mental health, about mindset, about all of these things with your kids. Because when I grew up, people didn't talk about mental health. They didn't talk about depression. They didn't talk about anxiety. They didn't talk about domestic violence. They didn't talk about any of those things. It was just, you just dealt with it. Those are your feelings, you handle it.
Yeah.
Right? If you're not in the home, too bad. You have to act like things are fine. Right. And you deal with it behind closed doors. And like my kids, I tell them, I'm like, it's okay to cry and it's okay to get angry. It's okay to talk about it, but you can't be disrespectful to people or yourself. Right? Those are my two things, right? Is I'm like, don't disrespect others and you don't disrespect yourself. So you can be upset with yourself that you didn't do well enough, but that just means we got to practice more.
Yeah. It doesn't mean, oh, I'm a failure. I'm such an idiot. I always fail. Right.
And I like my one son has some anxiety as well. And working through that with him, right? Where I was like, you don't have to worry about failure, right? Because when you fail, you learn. It gives you the tools to grow. You know that it doesn't work when you do it that way. So you have to do it a different way. Right. And it's funny because my husband is different and he'll ask the kids sometimes like, well, what did you fail at today? And all the kids are like, why would you ask me that? Yeah. Right. But then they'll be like, oh, I like did really bad on this, or I did, I tripped and fell over the soccer ball while we were playing in gym class today. Right. And then they start kind of like, not like kind of laughing about it. Right. And it takes that weight off, because often when you hear failure, you think, oh, I suck.
Yeah. Oh, no, I can't admit that I maybe failed at something.
Right.
I got to hide that.
Right. And so when you kind of like have these conversations with kids, they realize that it's normal. Right. And I tell my kids all the time, like, I fail at things all the time. Like, I forget to pick up things. Like, there was a week where I literally went to the grocery store 3 times and forgot my groceries in the cart every single time that I went there. And the last time I remember telling like my husband, I was like, you need to go back to the store and get it because I'm not going back there. I'm too embarrassed. Like I cannot walk in there and tell them I forgot my stuff again this week. But and so I really try to be really raw and honest with my kids and be like, no, it's okay to fail. It's okay to have bad days. It's okay.
Let me make a list of the failures I did.
Right? Yeah, exactly. Right?
You got it bad?
Yeah. And, and I think that's the one thing that, I think society is getting better at is talking about mental health and doing those things. And so I'm really honest with my kids. Like, if I'm like, I cry and they're like, are you sad today? And I'm like, yeah, I had a really long day at work. And they're like, okay. And it's funny now because they mimic what I say to them. So like, well, it's okay to cry.
Yeah.
Well, maybe you should like lay down for 5 minutes, right? And they start doing all these things that I tell them that they should do when they get upset. Right. Or the best is they'll be like, oh, maybe we should take 3 breaths, right? And I'm like, the best is when it comes from our 5-year-old, right? Because it's like, you're
yes, we should.
So cute. Yeah. Right. And so just like that mindset piece, mindfulness, I find plays a really big part in mental health. I never was big into meditating up until the last 1.5 years. And now every night, like, our kids do yoga. All of us as a family, we do yoga together and we breathe and we do our thankful thing. And the difference that I've noticed even in our kids' sleep is amazing. Like, so if our kids have one night where we don't do it, they're like, well, we didn't sleep well, we should do yoga tonight, right? Like before bed. And so it's really funny, just like the smallest tweak in your mindset. But it goes the same way with negative, right? If you have a negative thought that's really just in there, it changes that mindset too. And it can make all the difference in like your productivity or your sleep or your focus. And and I'm habitual multitasker. It's my daily life all the time. Yeah. And I know when I'm not doing the things I need to do. Like if I miss the gym, if I don't meditate, if I'm not sleeping, like I know because my schedule is like all of a sudden I'm like, oh, it's 10 and I'm 3 hours late for what I said I was going to do, right? Or, you know, I didn't get this done. And I'm like, well, why? Because I'm not taking the time for me, right? I'm not doing the things I need to do for myself and putting the responsibility back on me, right?
Yeah.
Instead of others, right? Because it's easy for us to do that. It's easy. Yeah.
And I once said, I said, if there's a problem, it's my fault. Like I told my staff this, and one of the staff members at the time were kind of like, well, that, like, no, like, it's our fault. Like, maybe we didn't, you know, I'm like, no, it's my fault because this is my company and I'm the leader here. So if you're having an issue, it's probably because I either didn't train you well enough, I didn't communicate well enough, I didn't whatever, right?
Yes.
And so I'm like, it's ultimately my responsibility here. And in a lot of ways, it seems like, oh, you shouldn't think like that. That's so, you know, but you know what? It's actually a very powerful place to be.
Yes.
Because if it's my responsibility, that means I'm also able to change it. Exactly. I'm not just like, oh, shoot, you know, whatever, it's out of my control. It's not that victim mentality. It's like, hey, I can fix this.
Exactly. And that's exactly it. Is a lot of us, or not, I should say a lot of us, but we do hit points in our life where we do go into that victim mentality, right? Mm-hmm. And it can be challenging to get out of. But when you do, you're right, it's absolutely powerful because we're taking our power back and we can change it.
Yeah.
We can grow. We can learn better ways to do it. And like, so that's kind of like, for me, like ultimately what took me from like my childhood, like the trauma, my loss, my negative experiences is taking my power back and being able to take responsibility. And I made a choice years ago that I was going to use what happened in my past to help other people, to help me be more compassionate, to help me be more empathetic, to give more to these people that are struggling than what I got when I needed somebody.
Right. Yeah.
And so that's always like my strive in my job is I want them to feel the way that I wish I felt when I needed somebody. Yeah. And one of the things I like to try and do is advocate for people and advocate for change and really try and make sure that I guess our agency and I'm doing the most that I can do. Because I think too, like when you're in any form of helping profession, that's why we do it, right? Is we want to help people. We want to change their life, right? Whether it's, we want them to live healthier. We want them to, you know, be fitter. We want them to reach their goals. We want them to be able to be successful. Whatever profession we're in, that's what we're striving for, is to help people better themselves or their lives in some way. And so, yeah, I find that is my biggest struggle, honestly, is because I can't shut that off.
Yeah, I can relate to that.
Yeah.
Like, why are you on your phone? No, I'm not. I'm just going to put that away.
I know. It's 9 o'clock at night. Hold on. Yeah. I'm just
plan for this gal. Yeah.
I know. And it's really, really hard because when you do genuinely care about people and their well-being, it's not something that you can switch off.
I know it can be really tricky. And I suppose that's the thing. It's like, okay, well, eventually, yeah, you know, you have put up some more boundaries.
Yes.
But yeah, and I think too, like what I've noticed is when you put yourself out there, like the way that you do, like even when I was talking in the gym or whatever, right? When you put yourself out there and you share openly with people, it really draws people to you. And then people want to come to you. They want to share, which can be wonderful because you're like, hey, maybe I can actually help this person. But it can be a little overwhelming, right? So there's that kind of, you know.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I think like you said, like helping people, when that's your passion, right? Like it's pretty powerful and it's pretty rewarding too when you do see people make those changes or they have those little light bulb moments. They're like, hey, you said that. Now like it's impacting me in this way. And you get to see that and you get to see that, hey, you know, I was able to help them in some way.
Yes.
And they're going to be better because of it, you know?
Exactly. And honestly, like that's in my line of work, we see a lot of and we work with people at their worst time, like literally at their worst time. So when they make any form of progress, whether it's a big step or a small step, it's huge, right? Because you're just like, yes, right? Like I'm rooting for you and you did it, right? Yeah. And this is so big. And it's a good feeling to have, right? Because you're like, yeah, I did help them. Mm-hmm. You know, it's funny, I have clients that our files are closed for years and every once in a while they'll reach out. Mm-hmm. Right. And they'll be like, I just want to let you know that we're doing really well.
Nice.
And like, I have this one girl that I worked with, and she was really not in a great place. And 2 years later, they had another baby. They're doing really well. She's like, this is where we're living. She's like, I'd love to actually take you for coffee for once, because she's like, we're doing better now. And I think it's really neat just to get to talk to people like that, right? And you do see the change, and it's, I guess, rewarding for me as a worker to see people make progress, right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, I love this conversation. Like, I feel like we could just go on and on. Is there anything else that you think people need to know, either about you or just about like life in general, that has either been helpful for you or that you've seen help other people?
I think like going back to like take responsibility for yourself. Try and take responsibility for where you are in your life, as hard as that is. Sometimes it's a really brutal eye opener when we look at it. We go, I'm here because of me, right? Like ultimately, right? And again, like I'm not trying to excuse, like if you've been through something traumatic or something like that, that's not on you. That's on them to get help, and that's their responsibility to take care of. But our healing is our responsibility. I think, mindfulness, being aware of your thoughts, self-awareness is a huge piece. So if you can develop self-awareness, it'll help you. Like you'll be 1,000 times more successful in whatever it is your goal is.
It's like emotional maturity.
It is. Yes.
Yeah.
It is. And actually, I love that. I like emotional intelligence, right?
Yeah.
Is something, and I feel like it's an area that we can all grow in, right? Because we don't like to look at our feelings. Feelings can be not great, right?
I'm mad. I'm just mad. It's like, why are you mad? What exactly triggered you? Why did that trigger you? Oh, it actually has nothing to do with the person that cut you off or whatever. It has something to do with when you were 5 years old and there was,
exactly.
You're like, it takes the power of it away.
Yes.
You're like, oh, I don't need to react like that anymore. Oh, okay.
Exactly. And honestly, that's something I do with my clients is we make trigger charts, and I'm like, okay, like what happened? How did you respond? And then I make them look at how would you like to respond? Mm-hmm. And so just kind of bridging that gap, because often when you tell someone gets mad and say they punch a wall, and you're like, okay, why did you do that? Well, I don't know. Yeah. Well, what's a better way to respond? Well, I don't know. Right. And you're like, hey, think about that for a minute. So how does your hand feel right now? Right. Like now you have to fix your wall. So with that, you're probably more mad about that. Your hand's sore and it didn't solve any problems. So what's a better way to respond? Right.
Yeah. How you can still hit something if you want, but maybe have like a glove and maybe something,
right?
Yeah.
Like maybe punch a pillow, get a punching bag, right? Like, do like change, even making a small change, right? I'm not going to hit the wall. I'm going to hit the punching bag instead. Yeah. Right. And getting them to visualize, okay, how do I want to respond to this? Mm-hmm. Right. And visualization is a big thing too, right? When you can visualize a goal or you can visualize, something happening, it can change a lot. So like when your awareness gets brought to something, whether it's a number, whether it's a feeling, whether it's a thought, whether it's a reoccurring pattern, you focus on it and you see it and your mind picks up on it.
Yes, right? You focus on whatever it is, whether it's, the positive. Yeah, like one of the things that like you kind of think is like, I can be happy, let's say. Now you're looking for happiness. Oh, I'm happy. That made me happy. That made me happy. We did this Bible study one time and it was about grace. So what the task every day was to see God's grace in your life.
Cool. Yeah.
So then all of a sudden we're like, oh, I saw God's grace here. And all of a sudden there's all this grace. And it's like, well, did you not was God not gracious before? Well, he's always been gracious, but now I'm seeing it because I'm writing it down. And it's so true to the focus. And that's why the thankfulness, gratefulness is so important, because that's what you're going to focus on.
Exactly. And honestly, like for me, for our kids, for everybody, it's made such a difference in our day-to-day life when you can go, okay, this bad thing happens, but I am so grateful that I had the opportunity. Mm-hmm. Right. Okay, today was a really hard day at work, but how grateful am I to be employed?
Yes.
Right. How grateful am I that I can put food on the table for my kids? Mm-hmm. Right. Kids break something. Well, how grateful am I that, they're old enough to help me clean it up. Yeah. Right. Like, but it's just picking out, even if it's the smallest thing, being able to pick out, I'm grateful for this today. Yeah. And it doesn't have to be 100 things, but something, because it does keep that positive mindset. There's a lot of negativity in our world with the news and with, social media, with everything. Right. And so I think like being able to be grateful, be thankful, and really focusing on all of the positives that you have in your life it's just huge for mindset. Oh, yeah. And that's like, honestly, for me, that's made the largest change in my life, because my trauma response always made me think like, what is the danger? What do I need to worry about? Mm-hmm. Is this safe? And my mindset was super, super negative. And so being able to switch and be like, okay, I'm nervous, but I'm thankful that I get the opportunity to do things that I'm afraid to do. I'm thankful that I have the money to go try new things, even if I don't always want to, right? Yeah. And just shifting it, right? Because it does if you can do that every day, you live a happier life and you don't even have to try.
I know.
Because it comes habit, right? And that's where I go back to like our kids, right? The first day they kind of were like, oh, well, I don't know what I'm thankful for, right? And now that's what they're looking for every day because they're excited to come home and write something on that chart, right? They're like, what am I thankful for today? Oh, I'm thankful for my friend. I'm thankful that it was sunny. Our son wrote that he's thankful for smelly farts because he laughs. And I'm like, that's the grossest thankful thing, but it's still a thankful thing, right? Yeah. And so I think when you can pick out the small things, you know, your life just gets easier and it's easier to focus on what's good.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, thanks so much, Danielle, for sharing with us. I really appreciate it. Hey, it's Carla. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast today. I have 3 things I want to tell you about myself. But first, please go check out my company, Power Fitness Online. PowerFitnessOnline.com or Power Fitness Online, Facebook or Instagram. What I do there is I help you. I train you so you can get fit, strong, healthy, have energy, feel good, and be at your best. Because in this life, we want to be at our best. I do, you do, we all do. So here's 3 facts about myself. Number 1, I've been a fitness trainer for 20 years. Yes, 20 years. Number 2, I'm 5'4" 3/4, not 5'4" 1/2, none of that. 5'4" 3/4. Number 3, I have 6 kids. Yes, they're all my own. None of them were twins. They're all my own. I had them one at a time. And I love my kids so much. So remember, go to powerfitnessonline.com if you want to get fit and stay fit.